Welcome to the Church Explained podcast, a conversation to grow your leadership and build your church. Today, I am the host of the podcast. Nathan is not with us today, so it's myself and our special guest, Paul Rice. Paul, welcome to the show.
Go for it.
And let me just interrupt it, because I think that is a good thing for people to think of, is that margin. Because as you've described there, Paul, it's not just for emergency, but this idea, what is the unexpected opportunity that's going to come our way this year? What's something that maybe God's going to surprise us on? And I guess if you've got an emergency fund, that's one thing. But if you have a margin, it's something that's even better, really, isn't it?
Yep.
Because it covers not just the emergency, but it covers opportunities and other things that could open up as well. I mean, it would be good to think of, what do you feel? Let's say, for example, a church has a 10% margin. Do you think that's different than investments then? Should a church have investments in the other things?
As in, physical financial investments?
Yeah, could be, yeah.
Yeah, I think those are helpful, and it's something that we as a church have been looking at now that we have a cash pool built up. Obviously, the market is down pretty severely at the moment, and we were going to invest back in January of 2022, and we're very glad God told us to be patient and wait because it would be worth about half, roughly, of what it is right now.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I think I would encourage, if you have the cash reserve. So obviously, common sense, get that emergency fund in place, right? Let's make sure we have enough to cover the emergencies that occur. But then once you get past that, as you start building up cash reserves, it's a great opportunity to begin investing either in the market. Mutual funds are pretty safe, generally speaking. Obviously, they do ebb and flow. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to make sure that the money that you have saved in the bank that's not reserved for emergencies is actually growing. Inflation here in the U.S. has been about 7% in the last several months. I don't know what it's been like elsewhere in other countries. But, if your money's just sitting in the bank, then it's not protected against that inflation. And so churches can take advantage of that as well. And here's the great thing, too. Church investments grow tax-free. And so if... Again, I'm thinking of it from the U.S. perspective here. But because churches are considered nonprofit organizations, any growth, any gains that you make on those investments as a church are yours. They are not taxed in any way, and so it's a great opportunity. Another tip that we're about to implement here is make sure that your savings that you are keeping, your emergency fund, is, if you're a U.S. and maybe they have other similar things overseas, make sure that savings is in a high yield savings account. Most U.S. savings account rates are about 0.01%. And so your money is basically sitting there doing nothing. Get that into a high yield. If you're in the U.S., you can usually get 3 to 4%. And, if you've got $100,000 in there, 4%, that is $4,000 in a year, another $4,000 a year. What could your church do with another $4,000?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, well, thanks for sharing that. Some of that may relate more to the American audience, and that's fine. That one's for free, so they can grab that. So, hey, you've mentioned two things. What's the last three things that you're thinking of this system or around finances?
Yeah, the next one is generously fund your mission, and this goes back to pushing your expenses and what you're investing money into through that mission, vision, strategy filter that we talked about at the very beginning.
Sure.
So I always like to say that budgets are less about the numbers, and they're more about decisions that created those numbers. And budgeting is really just a decision-making process. It's great. Sure. Again, we talked about earlier, just because your budget's in the black for the year does not mean that you're actually being effective as a church. The decisions that you're making with that money is what is going to cause you to be effective and generate that return on investment that we so desire. And so we want to make sure that we are, and I added the word generously in there, we want to make sure that we are generously funding the things that are going to advance the mission that God's called us to. And one of the ways that we can make sure that we're doing that, give ourselves some guide rails, is to just pick 3 to 5 things that your church is going to be really, really good at. Again, back to the side hustle things. Your resources start getting divested into other areas. It gets spread out. It's too thin. At some point, you need enough money to really make an impact in whatever area that you're trying to make an impact in, and $100 isn't going to cut it anymore. You need to pool your resources into just a few things, and to really actually have a true financial impact into these areas. And you brought up a great point earlier too. Not only will it pool your financial resources, but now you have more volunteers. You have more time to devote to these 3 to 5 things that your church is going to be really, really good at. That's going to actually advance your mission. So make sure that you're generously funding those areas. You're getting enough money into those areas to do what you're trying to accomplish. The next step is to create healthy systems, and this is all about accountability. This is all of the boring finance things that nobody likes to deal with, the reports and the expense tracking and the income tracking and filing taxes and all of this kind of stuff for your employees' payroll. But it's so, so important, and I'm not going to delve into just a lot of the technicalities there, but one thing I will say that is really, really important, I think, for pastors is that you should not be, and this is particularly applicable to pastors of church plants and small churches where the teams are small, you should not be the only person that sees the finances. Maybe you shouldn't even be the person that manages the finances. Let's take it a step further. And that goes back to that mindset of, okay, this is God's money. This is not my money. And if you are the senior leader of any organization, it's really, really wise to have somebody else that can tell you no, that can say, I don't think this is a good investment right now, or no, we don't have the money, because otherwise it can be really tempting to, again, go try that cool idea. Oh, well, we'll just spend some money over here, and then you're not measuring it. You have no idea if it was effective or not. But have somebody that can tell you no. Don't be the sole owner of those finances. That is a very healthy system that any church of any size should be implementing. I just call out church plants and small churches in particular because often they don't have the staff to help make that happen. Something that you can do to alleviate that is to get over this idea that finances are so private and so secret that a volunteer who likely has more experience in the financial world than you do can't help you manage, can't help you say no to the things that are bad investments for you to spend on. I had a guest on, Jeff Sage, who's out under Pastor Judd Wilhite at Central Church in Las Vegas. And Jeff just kept hammering this point home. Why can't a volunteer do that? And so if you're a small church pastor who doesn't have a big team underneath them, you can find somebody that you trust, even if they're not a part of your church. It could be outside of your church too. Find somebody to help you say no, to give you that accountability and give you that healthy system of accountability to make sure that you don't end up in a situation that you're going to regret and that shows up in the news later.
Yeah, definitely, because that's going to protect the leader as well. And I like what you were saying there, Paul, this idea of if they're not with you, if you haven't got the volunteers or you haven't got the people on staff, listen, there's plenty of other churches around, like go and ask another church. Go and ask the church down the road, can you help us with this, rather than the leader being vulnerable and putting themselves at risk, really. They're putting themselves at risk and they're putting, I guess, the new church at risk if it's a new church plant. So, I think I'm fully with you on that and would fully encourage all leaders to be thinking through very carefully, who's seeing the finances and who's in charge of the finances. Because actually you want protection for yourself as the leader in those situations as well. So systems are important. What else do you have there that's, I think, number 5 on your list there?
I think it may have dropped out for a moment there.
Yeah, not a problem. It'll pick up in the recording. So yeah, the number 5 item that you have there, what does that look like for people?
Yep. The last one, and I think this is maybe the most difficult one for pastors to approach, especially if they have had no experience, they didn't grow up hearing about money in church. But the 5th one is to attract and develop investors. And again, I go back to that investment idea. I say attract and develop investors because you want people not just, obviously we want to worship God with the money that we are giving through the church to God. But you also want people who are fully bought in to the mission and vision and strategy of what your church is trying to accomplish. And so that means that you don't want people who are just giving because you're supposed to. You want people actually investing into the mission of your church. And when you frame it that way, That is when you get people who are actually giving consistently, giving that you can count on, giving that you can rely on. And that's going to mean talking about money in church. And I know that is a sensitive, hot button issue. Certain denominations are very against it. Certain denominations probably take it way too far. So $1,000 today and your debt will be wiped out from a check in the mail. You've seen the TV, the televangelist types. But there is a healthy way that we can go about talking about money. Mm-hmm. And I think the healthiest way that we can talk about that is to, again, adopt the mindset that this is God's money, not my money. You're not giving necessarily to our church. You are giving this to God. And so when you frame it in a sense of, hey, this is an act of worship to God, and you are investing in the kingdom of God when you are giving through this local church, that's something that people can really grasp and get on board. People get turned off, when they're like, yeah, pastor needs a raise, and so let's give more. Or, hey, we need this or we need that. Frame it in such a way that it is about faith. It's about God. And I even, my most recent guest, Pastor Cody Woodard, was talking about talking about money as a discipleship opportunity. They recently did a kind of a building campaign, fundraiser, strategic initiative type of thing. And they actually used the opportunity in that campaign to teach people, why do we give? What is it about this tithing thing? What is it about generosity? Why are we doing all of this in the first place? Okay, yeah, it's an act of worship, but what else? What is happening here? Yeah. And so when we frame it in this discipleship framework, people can latch onto that, and they're not quite so turned off by it. And if you're a pastor and you're listening, I would highly encourage you, if you're nervous about talking about money, if you're nervous about bringing up the giving thing, statistically speaking, people are only going to give when presented the opportunity. And so you should be presenting that opportunity even if it's a bit uncomfortable. And usually the argument, the pushback that you get is, well, what if people leave? What if people send me nasty emails? Things like that. Uncomfortable conversations have to happen. Then probably those people weren't bought into your mission and vision anyways. And if your whole point of running a church is to keep as many people in the seats as possible, I think you're missing the point here. You're missing the point in the mission of what Christ has called his church to. And so let those people go. We are not here to try to hold on to people and make them sit through our 1 hour sermon every week and give their offering just to keep them happy. Talk about it. Jesus talked about money more than just about anything else in the New Testament. Right. And so, and the reason is because money, the reason money is such a sensitive issue is because it's a heart. Jesus says we are literally tied. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so people invest their money into things that they care about, into things that they believe are a worthwhile investment. And when you don't talk about money in church, you're basically telling people, I don't believe that the mission of this church is important enough to ask you to give into it. Nonprofits are great at this. You go to any nonprofit, you see in the U.S. we have the United States Girl Scout Association, and they sell these cookies every year. It's a great way for young ladies to learn how to be businesswomen, learn how to sell, learn how to promote. And man, every time I go to it's Girl Scout cookie season right now. Every time I go to the grocery store, I'm accosted by the by the Girl Scouts selling the cookies outside. But they believe in what they're doing, and so they are unafraid. Most of them are very, very bold. They'll come right up to you as you're walking out with your groceries. Hey, do you want to buy some Girl Scout cookies? And it's really, really hard to tell an 8-year-old no because you already bought something from somebody else. But they are so bold. They are so willing because they believe in what they're doing. Why, as pastors, why, as church leaders, are we so afraid to ask people to give into something that is infinitely more important? Eternity is on the line here, infinitely more important than a box of Girl Scout cookies. And so I would encourage you to take a step of boldness and ask people to give. Stop apologizing. Don't do the jokes, oh, it's going into my pocket. Ha ha ha. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to have this offering moment. Get out of this apologetic attitude and just ask. People are going to be most willing to give when the opportunity is presented to them. So make sure that you are being attractive by to investors by spending your money wisely, by stewarding it wisely, but also make sure that you are developing those investors by discipling them, teaching about giving, talking about giving beyond just giving to the church. Make it a discipleship thing, and really develop those investors. And that's going to cover the income, piece of your budget. Budgets are in two pieces. You have expenses and you have income. And so those are the five pieces of the framework that I think every church needs to be implementing. As you get bigger, you get add on to that, and you get into the generosity campaigns and teams and things like that. But at a minimum, just getting started out, clearly define your mission. What are you trying to do? Put margin in your budget. Generously fund the things that you're going to do. Pick those 3 to 5 things that's going to advance your mission. Build those accountability systems in place. Create some healthy systems around you. Get some protection as a pastor. Make sure that you're tracking your finances properly. And then don't forget about the giving piece. Attract and develop those investors. Make sure you're talking about money. Talk about giving. Don't be afraid to. It can be nerve-wracking. There might be some difficult conversations, but it's going to be worth it in the end. And I'd probably be willing to say that if you're not talking about money right now and you think you might need more giving, start talking about it consistently. Have that consistent opportunity to do a learning series, do something. And I promise you that your giving will increase. I can't give you a guaranteed percentage, obviously, but if you're not talking about it, most people are not going to give. So I would highly encourage churches to incorporate those 5 pieces into their financial systems.
Paul, thanks for sharing those 5, I'm going to say pillars, 5 items of that framework. I think is really helpful for pastors and leaders to hear. And I think you're right. It is about connecting it all to the vision and the mission of the church, because if you are going to talk about giving, you've got to talk about it around those areas rather than standing up and saying, well, we want money for a new lighting system. It's got to be, hey, we want money for the new lighting system for the vision. Whatever you're going to take it for, you've got to always tie it back to vision and mission. So that's really important. We've got a few more questions to go just before we wrap up for today. But we've been talking a lot about leaders. And I guess one of the questions I had here is around, do you think a leader's personal finances have anything to do with how they operate in the church? And maybe that's a difficult question, and maybe a question maybe some leaders don't want us to talk about. But I think it's an important one. What's your thoughts around this? I mean, like the leader's personal financial situation, how does that impact how the church operates?
Yeah. I think that the circumstances around somebody's finances in terms of the amount of money they make have minimal impact on the way that leader might, the way that the finances at the church that they lead might have. What will have an impact is how they manage their own personal finances.
So not the amount,
yes,
but how they manage.
Exactly. You can't give what you don't have. You can't lead somebody else to a place that you've not been yourself before. At least personally. And so I've even seen this in my own life as well. The way that a church leader, whether they're the finance person at the church or whether they're the senior pastor, whatever role that they're taking on, that they have some say over the finances, some kind of direct control over it, however they manage their money at home will 100% with time reflect how they manage money at the church that they are at. 100% of the time. Because the habits that you're forming personally are the habits that will show up publicly in your organization. And if you are doing a poor job managing your finances at home, you are going to incorporate and interject those same habits into the church that you're leading. You haven't changed as a person just because you're at work, as the pastor.
If you have no margin, and you're always spending beyond what you make, again, that could have an impact on the church as well, couldn't it?
Yep, 100%. Your habits are going to carry over. There's just no way around it. You don't become a different person once you show up to work. You're the same person. And like you said, the same spending habits that you have at home. This is where pastors that are especially visionary types that see squirrels and they're like, oh, let's go do that. Oh, let's go do that. This is when the money starts really flowing out the door. And me and my pastor have had this conversation, and we've talked about this, and so he won't mind if I bring this up. But early on in the church, he was very much that way. Let's go try this thing. We're just going to spend money on whatever we think we need, and that's how a $3,000 3-second radio ad gets put out that has 0 return on your investment. it was a seemingly great idea, and let's just go do it. And so, $3,000 out the door right there. And so, but some of that stemmed from his personal experience with finances in his very young adult life. He had ended up in
upbringing as well.
Yeah, he ended up in a lot of debt. He was working his way out of it, but some of those habits were still there, even at the time. And so he has since matured and grown out of a lot of those, and is doing very, very well in his personal finances now. And that has been a reflection of me having to have fewer conversations with him and our operations director. No, we can't spend this money. No, stop. No, you can't do that. Those kinds of conversations happen far, far less. And I'm able to really fully trust them at this point, to go, yes, okay, I think you really understand what is actually needed. Yes, you may go spend this money. You have a budget. Go spend it as long as you stick to the budget. A lot of the willy-nilly spending habits are long gone at this point. But it's just a good example of, for him, some of those leftover habits that he had personally as he was working out of things carried over a little bit into the church itself. And so again, he's matured largely out of that. So, but your habits are going to carry over. How you manage your personal finances as a church leader will be reflected in the church.
Definitely, and it's a big thing, I think, as leaders. Not that leaders have to be perfect; they can't be. But of course, I mean, you can notice it not just in their financial habits, but like sometimes you'll go to a leader's home, and if it's very untidy, you go to the church. It's the same thing, and of course, one reflects the other, and it's good for people to think, well, how am I living? Because it will have an impact. And I guess the key thing is for any leaders to surround themselves with the right types of people who are going to help them in their journey as they seek to build the church. So, Paul, you've shared some great insights today, and maybe some real building blocks that churches can be thinking of and leaders can be thinking of implementing into their settings. Maybe there's some things missing. Maybe some churches are running some things, but maybe they don't have margin. Maybe they're running in another way, but something's missing. It's good for them to think of those things today. So before we wrap up, Paul, hey, thanks for being on the show. I've got a couple of quick-fire questions for you before we wrap up, and then you can share with people where to find you today. So what are you most excited about, and what are you most challenged about? Remember, they're quick-fire, so you've got to answer them quickly as well today, Paul.
Sounds good. Right now, I'm most challenged about my 3-year-old, who, as I've discovered as a new parent, is acting just like I did at that age.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was just as a youngster, getting frustrated at just the little things, and when things don't work out right away, getting frustrated at that. So having learning to parent basically a mini me has been very challenging. I think what I'm most excited about and challenged about right now is at church is actually standing up kind of a generosity development track to help people move from not having given before to actually not only giving consistently, but also giving over and above the tithe, and helping to disciple people in that way. So that is a new challenge in front of me, and I'm looking forward to implementing it.
That's exciting as well. And your top 2 books you would recommend, and why?
Yeah, Essentialism by Dave Mckeown. This is a pretty popular book. If you're a church leader, I would highly encourage you to read it. It is all about filtering down what is necessary from what is unnecessary. He's got some great material in there, and I use the principles that he outlines in that book to filter our spending decisions and investing decisions at the church. Do we really need this? If not, it goes in the bucket. I would say if it's not a 95%, very, very clear yes. He says if it's not a clear yes, it's a clear no. So check that book out, Essentialism by Dave Mckeown. And the second one is a great one if you're a podcaster. I would highly recommend it, especially if you are an interviewer like yourself. It's called Listen Like You Mean It by Jimena Vengochea. And in this, she actually talks about how her own interviewing skills as a human researcher developed. And she would go to people's houses and ask them how they're doing things and just watch and really listen to gain understanding, not just listen so you can spit the next thing out. And again, would highly recommend it. Listen Like You Mean It by Jimena Vengochea. It has really helped my interviewing skills, learning to listen instead of just thinking of the next question.
Well, we'll drop those in the show notes. Dave Mckeown, same surname as me. but no
No
relative,
relation.
unless he is a relative, and if he is, and he's made a lot of money, please come and see me. We can do something with that for our vision and mission here at Icon Church. But that's fantastic. Two great books. I've read that one myself, of course, as well. So, and your favorite meal of choice? If you had one meal you could choose, what would it be?
I'm a Southern Texas boy, so I like chicken fried steak with garlic mashed potatoes, a roll, and give me just a big old slice of chocolate cake with some chocolate icing on it. I would choose that meal every time if I could.
That sounds pretty good to me. I'm getting hungry. We're partway through our 21 days of prayer and fasting, so you've just
Sorry.
made me more hungry today, Paul. And your last question today, before we can share with people a little bit more about where to find you. How do you stay fresh in life? What do you do to stay fresh?
Yeah, playing drums is a great outlet for me. I know we've brought this up already. For me, it's a great stress reliever.
Definitely.
I just enjoy doing it. You get to hit stuff with sticks really, really hard. It's good. It's good for stress relief and a good creative outlet too. I get a lot of ideas while I'm playing, not only just for musically, but also for life as well. I want to go back to what I said earlier. Intentionally be interested in other people. The podcasting thing for me has just been eye-opening. Helps keep me from getting stale and stagnant in my own thinking. You get access to different perspectives if you'll just go and talk to a stranger and ask them about themselves. How's life? What do you do? And just be interested in other people. That will keep you from getting stuck in your own thinking silo and give you a little bit of an expanded view of life. And also watching pretty much any historical documentary or drama. My favorite, particularly with respect to the World Wars. I love all that history. My favorite docu-series was by HBO called Band of Brothers, about the 101st Airborne Easy Company Airborne Division who dropped into Normandy. So anything history, I will watch. History Channel here in the U.S., anything on Hulu or Netflix, I will watch it, and I love to unwind with that.
Yeah, those things help. And as you say, better to hit drums than hit people with sticks. That's not very useful either. Hey, but it's been so good to have you on the show today, Paul. Thanks for sharing your insights and your experience and what you've discovered. Hey, how can people find you? What's the best place for people to find you? I know you've got a couple of things on the go, so why didn't you share with us today before we wrap up?
I'm most active on Instagram. It's @MissionDrivenBudget is the handle. I've kind of abandoned Twitter at this point. Most of my audience is active on Instagram, so that's where you can find me. Shoot me a DM. You can also find the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, you name it, it's all out there. Or you can head to show notes and things like that at missiondrivenbudget.com/podcast. I also do help, do a little bit of consulting and coaching from time to time. You can head to missiondrivenbudget.com/calendar. If there's something you just want to have a phone call, or you actually want me to, hire me on to help sort out any issues you might be having with your finance processes, help increase giving, fix problems, I am more than open and willing to do that. Let's connect.
Yeah, I like that. Hey, thanks for that. We'll put all that in the show notes, and we'll link your podcast as well on our site as we put out the podcast. So if people want to find you or get some coaching or consultation from yourself. And I guess the great thing is that this can happen, online as well. If somebody wants to grab a Zoom call with you, you can do that, even if they're a different part of the country, or even, I guess, a different part of the world. They can still connect with you. The genius of technology for us today. So, Paul, thanks for being with us. That is a wrap for us today. So thank you to all our listeners, for those who are watching, for being part of the Church Explained podcast today. Don't forget to rate, review wherever you find us on the Church Explained podcast. We'd love to connect with you and find out more. Remember, we've got also lots of free resources on icon.church/open. Lots of team resources, leadership resources you can have for completely free as well. So, hey, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.